In a sprawling Beverly Hills mansion worth $30 million, a desperate mother stood at her breaking point, staring at her 2-year-old son who weighed nearly 60 pounds. 5 highly qualified nannies had already quit. The pediatrician had no answers. Her husband had emotionally checked out. But when a 53-year-old housekeeper from South Central walked through those marble doors, she saw something everyone else had missed. What happened next didn't just transform one child's life, it exposed the dark truth behind closed doors of the wealthy. This is a story about what money can't buy, and what love can heal. The morning alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m. in a cramped studio apartment in South Central. Grace Williams rolled out of bed, her joints protesting as they always did these days. At 53, her body carried the weight of 3 decades cleaning other people's homes, raising her own 3 children alone, and fighting battles most people never had to imagine. She moved quietly through her morning routine. Coffee from yesterday's grounds, reheated in the microwave. Toast with margarine, no butter. Too expensive this week. As she dressed in her simple black work uniform, she caught her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Gray streaks ran through her dark hair, pulled back in her signature tight bun. Deep lines framed her brown eyes, eyes that had seen poverty, loss, and struggle, but never lost their kindness. Grace's phone screen glowed with a text from her daughter, Maya, a college senior studying social work. "Morning, Mama. You got this. Love you." Grace smiled. Maya was her pride, the first in their family to attend university. Every extra shift Grace took, every dollar she saved, went toward keeping that dream alive. At 5:45 a.m., Grace stood at the bus stop on Crenshaw Boulevard. The city was just waking up, and she watched as BMWs and Mercedes glided past toward the wealthy neighborhoods in the hills. She knew those neighborhoods well. She'd been cleaning their homes for 30 years. She'd seen behind the perfect facades, heard the arguments through closed doors, witnessed the loneliness that money couldn't cure. Today was different, though. Today she started at the Montgomery estate in Beverly Hills. The agency had called her personally, practically begging. "Grace, we need someone special. This family, they're difficult. The baby has issues. 5 nannies have quit in 6 months. But they specifically requested a housekeeper only. No childcare. Please, you're the best we have." Grace had hesitated. She was a housekeeper, not a miracle worker. But the pay was exceptional. Double her usual rate. Maya's tuition payment was due next month. She'd said yes. 2 buses and 1 hour later, Grace stood before iron gates that slowly opened to reveal a driveway longer than her entire street back home. The Montgomery mansion rose before her like something from a movie. White columns, manicured lawns, a fountain in the circular driveway. It was beautiful. It was cold. The front door opened before she could knock. A thin woman in expensive athleisure wear stood there, dark circles under her eyes despite perfect makeup. This was Rebecca Montgomery, 34 years old, looking simultaneously wealthy and wrecked. "You're the new housekeeper?" Rebecca's voice was flat, emotionless. "Yes, ma'am. Grace Williams. Come in. I'll show you what needs to be done. And just so we're clear, you're here to clean, nothing else. We've had issues with staff overstepping boundaries." Grace nodded, following Rebecca through rooms that could each fit her entire apartment. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, original artwork on walls. Everything gleamed, yet somehow the house felt dark. Heavy curtains blocked the California sunshine. The air conditioning was turned so low Grace could see her breath. Then she heard it. A child's cry, muffled and distant, coming from upstairs. Not the sharp cry of pain or hunger, but something that made Grace's chest tighten, a sound of deep, soul-level loneliness. "That's just Ethan," Rebecca said, not even looking toward the stairs. "He cries constantly. The pediatrician says he's manipulative, using tears to get attention. We're teaching him to self-soothe. You're to ignore it completely. Do not go to him. Do not interact with him. He needs to learn. Grace's hands clenched at her sides, but she kept her face neutral. 30 years of working in wealthy homes had taught her when to speak and when to observe first. The kitchen is through here. I expect all surfaces sanitized daily. The master bedroom is off-limits. My husband's office, Rebecca pointed down a hallway. Absolutely no one enters. He works from home sometimes. As Rebecca continued the tour, that cry came again. Grace had raised 3 children. She knew the difference between manipulation and desperation. That baby upstairs wasn't playing games. That baby was drowning. Do you have any questions? Rebecca asked, already halfway out of the kitchen. No, ma'am. I'll start with the main floor. Rebecca nodded and walked away, her designer shoes clicking on marble. Grace heard her climbing the stairs, heard a door open and close, then silence. Even the crying stopped, replaced by an eerie quiet that felt wrong in a house that should be filled with a toddler's laughter. Grace began cleaning, but her mind was upstairs. She thought about Maya's text that morning. You got this. But what exactly did she have? A job that paid well but came with a rule that violated everything she believed in? She'd been a mother before she was a housekeeper. Some instincts didn't retire. By lunchtime, Grace had cleaned the main floor until it sparkled. Rebecca appeared briefly, nodded approval, then disappeared again. The house remained silent except for occasional muffled sounds from upstairs. No laughter. No playing. No joy. At 2:47 p.m., Grace heard it again. That cry. But this time it was different. Sharper, more desperate. Then Rebecca's voice, strained and breaking. Ethan, please. Just stop. Why won't you stop? Grace's hands stilled on the counter she was wiping. She closed her eyes, fighting an internal battle between the job she needed and the instinct screaming at her to run up those stairs. The crying grew louder. Footsteps pounded overhead. Then Rebecca's voice again, this time cracking completely. I can't do this anymore. I can't. That's when Grace heard the front door open, and everything changed. Before we continue with what happened next in this incredible journey, if stories like this touch your heart and you want to see more hidden truths that reveal what really matters in life, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It means everything too. Now, let's see what Grace discovered when she broke the rules and went upstairs. The man who entered through the front door was tall, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than Grace's monthly rent. Marcus Montgomery, 42, CEO of a tech investment firm, looked every bit the powerful executive. But as he dropped his briefcase and loosened his tie, Grace saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that comes from running away rather than running toward something. Who are you? His tone wasn't rude, just surprised. Grace Williams, sir. The new housekeeper. Marcus nodded absently, already heading toward his office. Then he paused. Has it been quiet today? Before Grace could answer, Ethan's cry pierced through the house again, followed by Rebecca's voice, cracking with desperation. Please, someone help me. Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't move toward the stairs. Instead, he looked at Grace with something that resembled shame, then turned toward his office. I have calls to make. Grace watched him walk away, and something inside her snapped. She'd seen a lot in 30 years, but she'd never seen two parents so completely shut down. Whatever rule the agency had given her, whatever boundary Rebecca had drawn, none of it mattered more than that child's cry. She climbed the stairs. The hallway upstairs was dimmer than below, more curtains drawn. Grace followed the sound to a door at the end, a nursery by the animal stickers half peeled off the door. She knocked softly. I said no staff. Rebecca's voice was sharp. Ma'am, I just thought. The door flew open. Rebecca stood there, mascara streaked down her face, hair disheveled, looking nothing like the composed woman from this morning. Behind her, Grace could see into the nursery. And then she saw Ethan. The 2-year-old sat in an oversized crib, surrounded by stuffed animals and toys he wasn't playing with. But it was his size that made Grace's breath catch. The child was massive for his age, his little body swollen, his face puffy. He wore a onesie that strained at the seams. Tears streamed down his round cheeks as he reached toward his mother with desperate, pudgy hands. "Mama, Mama." Grace's professional training screamed at her to step back, apologize, leave. But her mother's heart saw something else entirely. This wasn't a manipulative child. This was a baby drowning in needs no one understood. "Mrs. Montgomery," Grace said gently, "maybe I could just. You could just follow instructions." Rebecca snapped. Then her face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do anymore. He cries all the time. The pediatrician says he's manipulating us, that we need to let him cry it out, but it's been months and he just gets worse and worse. Look at him. He's enormous. We've tried everything." Grace looked past Rebecca at Ethan. The child had stopped crying and was staring at her with wide, desperate eyes. There was something in that gaze, a plea, a recognition, a hope that maybe this stranger could see what his own parents couldn't. "Mrs. Montgomery," Grace said carefully, "I've raised 3 children. Sometimes babies cry because they need something we're not giving them. We give him everything." Rebecca's voice broke. "This house, toys, the best food." "That's not what I meant." Grace kept her voice soft. "May I?" Rebecca stared at her for a long moment, then stepped aside with a defeated gesture. "Why not? You can't make it worse." Grace entered the nursery. Despite its luxury, designer furniture, expensive toys, a mural of jungle animals on the wall, the room felt sterile. Cold. The curtains were drawn here too. The temperature was frigid. It wasn't a nursery. It was a storage room for a child. She approached the crib slowly. "Hey there, Ethan. My name is Grace." Ethan watched her with those huge, solemn eyes. His crying had stopped completely, replaced by cautious observation. "You've been having a hard time, haven't you, baby?" Grace reached into the crib, not to pick him up yet, but just to place her hand gently on his back. The child flinched, then slowly relaxed under her touch. She could feel his little heart racing. "It's okay," she murmured. "It's okay to be sad. It's okay to need help." Rebecca watched from the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. "The doctor said not to reward his crying. Every time we pick him up, we reinforce the behavior." Grace turned to look at her. "Mrs. Montgomery, with all respect, how long have you been following this advice?" 6 months. "And has it worked?" Rebecca's silence was answer enough. Grace looked back at Ethan. Sometimes what looks like manipulation is just a child who hasn't learned how to ask for what they need. And sometimes what they need isn't food or toys. She paused. "May I pick him up?" Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. Grace lifted Ethan from the crib. He was heavy, much heavier than a 2-year-old should be, and she understood immediately what had happened. This child had learned that the only time his parents responded was when he was fed. Food had become love. Food had become comfort. Food had become the only language his family spoke. But as she held him against her shoulder, Ethan didn't ask for food. He didn't cry. He simply pressed his face into her neck and held on like a person drowning who just found solid ground. "When's the last time someone just held him?" Grace asked quietly. Not while feeding him, not trying to get him to sleep. Just held him because he needed to be held? Rebecca's face crumpled again. I don't remember. He got so big so fast, and my back hurts, and he always wants to eat, and the doctor said we were creating dependency issues." Her words tumbled out in a rush of guilt and exhaustion. Grace swayed gently, rubbing Ethan's back. The child's breathing slowed, his body relaxing in her arms. "Mrs. Montgomery, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm just a woman who's raised children. But I know this. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. This baby isn't manipulating you. He's just lonely. The word hung in the air like a revelation. Lonely. In a $30 million mansion, surrounded by everything money could buy, this child was desperately, achingly lonely. Rebecca sank onto the nursery floor, pulling her knees to her chest. I was so happy when he was born, she whispered. I had everything planned. I was going to be the perfect mother. But he cried all the time and nothing worked, and Marcus was always at work, and the nannies kept quitting, and the doctor kept saying I was doing it wrong. She looked up at Grace with raw, exhausted eyes. How did I get here? How did I become the kind of mother who's afraid of her own son? Grace continued swaying with Ethan, who had now gone completely still, his chubby fingers clutching her uniform. You're not afraid of him, Mrs. Montgomery. You're afraid you've already failed him. But you haven't. Not yet. Not if you're willing to try something different. What? What should I do? Grace looked down at Ethan, whose eyes were starting to close. First, we let him know he's not alone. That someone sees him. That he's worth more than what he eats. She met Rebecca's gaze. And then we figure out the rest together. For the first time since Grace arrived, something shifted in Rebecca's expression. Not hope exactly. She was too exhausted for hope. But maybe something smaller. Maybe the willingness to try one more time. The agency said you were just here to clean, Rebecca said softly. Grace smiled gently. I am here to clean. But sometimes the biggest mess is the one we can't see. What would you do if you discovered someone with incredible need hidden behind wealth and perfection? Have you ever seen behind the curtain of someone's perfect life, only to find pain? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories matter. The next morning, Grace arrived to find Rebecca waiting in the kitchen, looking like she'd actually slept. Not well, the dark circles were still there, but better than yesterday. I told Marcus about what you said. Rebecca began without preamble. About Ethan being lonely. He thinks I'm being emotional, but... She paused, hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Would you be willing to spend some time with Ethan today? While I try to figure out what we've been doing wrong. Grace set down her cleaning supplies. Of course, Mrs. Montgomery. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine emerged. Grace would arrive, and instead of immediately cleaning, she'd spend the first hour with Ethan. She'd open the nursery curtains, letting California sunshine flood the room. She'd sit on the floor and simply be present. No agenda, no feeding schedule, no sleep training. Just presence. Ethan responded like a flower finally getting water. The constant crying decreased. He started babbling, pointing at things, trying to communicate. Grace taught him simple words. Book, ball, hug. That last one became his favorite. Hug, he'd say, reaching for her, and Grace would scoop him up, this heavy toddler who was learning that affection didn't require eating. But the real breakthrough came on day 9. Grace brought something from home, a small photo album of her own children when they were young. She sat with Ethan, showing him pictures, telling him stories. This is my daughter Maya when she was about your age. See? She's laughing because her brother made a funny face. Ethan stared at the photos with intense concentration. Then he did something that made Grace's heart stop. He pointed at Maya's smiling face, then at his own face, and said one clear word. Happy. It was a question. This child didn't know if he was allowed to be happy, if happiness was even an option for him. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Yes, baby. You can be happy. You deserve to be happy. Rebecca, who'd been watching from the doorway, turned away quickly, but not before Grace saw her wipe her eyes. That afternoon, after Grace helped Ethan nap without food for the first time in months, Rebecca approached her in the kitchen. I want to try, she said quietly. I want to be the one who holds him, who plays with him. But every time I try, I freeze up. What if I do it wrong again? What if? Mrs. Montgomery, Grace interrupted gently. There's no wrong way to love your child. You just start. Small steps. The next day, Grace orchestrated a moment. She was holding Ethan, reading him a book, when Rebecca came in. Instead of handing Ethan over, Grace patted the floor beside her. "Come sit with us. He loves this story." Rebecca hesitated, then slowly lowered herself to the floor. Ethan watched his mother with cautious eyes, but didn't cry, didn't pull away. Grace continued reading, her voice steady and calm, creating a safe space. Halfway through the book, Ethan reached out and touched Rebecca's hand. Just a touch, tentative testing. Rebecca froze, tears streaming silently down her face. But she didn't pull away. She turned her hand over and let Ethan's small fingers curl around hers. They sat like that for 20 minutes, Grace reading, Ethan holding his mother's hand, Rebecca crying quietly. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a movie moment. But it was real, and it was a beginning. Everything changed on a Tuesday afternoon in the 3rd week. Marcus came home early, which was unusual. He found Grace in the living room with Ethan, who was attempting his first real steps. Not the shuffle walk he'd been doing, but actual coordinated steps. Grace was cheering him on, and Ethan was giggling, a sound that had become more common but still felt precious every time. "What's going on here?" Marcus's voice was cold. Grace straightened up. "Mr. Montgomery. Ethan is. I can see what Ethan is doing. What I want to know is why our housekeeper is playing nanny when we specifically hired you to clean." Ethan, sensing the tension, immediately reached for Grace, his face crumpling toward tears. "Sir, Mrs. Montgomery asked me to. My wife is not in charge of staffing decisions." "I am." Marcus's jaw was set, his executive persona fully engaged. This is exactly what happened with the nannies. Everyone thinks they know better than the experts. Everyone thinks they can fix him with hugs and feelings. "Mr. Montgomery, your son isn't broken." "Enough." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the agency. This arrangement isn't working." Rebecca appeared at the top of the stairs. "Marcus, wait. Stay out of this, Rebecca. You're too emotionally compromised to make rational decisions about Ethan." Emotionally compromised? Rebecca descended the stairs, and Grace saw something she'd never seen before. Fire in those exhausted eyes. "Our son weighed 60 pounds at 2 years old, Marcus. He cried 18 hours a day. 5 nannies quit. I was taking pills just to get through the day. And in 3 weeks, Grace has done what none of us could do. She helped me see my own child." She's the help, Rebecca. She's not a therapist, she's not a doctor. No, she's something better. She's a mother. And unlike you, she actually shows up. The words hung in the air like a bomb. Marcus's face went red, then pale. "I show up. I work 70-hour weeks to pay for this house, the nannies, the doctors." "You write checks, Marcus. That's not the same as showing up." Ethan started crying, overwhelmed by the raised voices. Grace instinctively reached for him, but Marcus stepped between them. "Don't," he said coldly. "This is exactly the problem. You're making him dependent. He's 2 years old." Rebecca's voice broke. "He's supposed to be dependent. That's what children do, they need people." Grace watched this unfold, her heart breaking. She'd seen this pattern before in wealthy homes. Parents so afraid of their own feelings that they pathologize their children's normal needs. Marcus pulled out his phone again. "I'm calling Dr. Sherman. This has gone too far." "Dr. Sherman?" Rebecca laughed bitterly. "The pediatrician who told us to let our baby cry it out for 6 months? The one who said a 2-year-old was manipulating us? That Dr. Sherman. He's a Harvard-educated physician." "He's wrong, Marcus. Can't you see that? Look at our son." They both turned to look at Ethan, who was now in Grace's arms, his face buried in her shoulder, his small body shaking with sobs. Not the manipulative cries Dr. Sherman had diagnosed. Real, terrified sobs of a child watching his world fall apart again. Marcus's expression flickered. Just for a moment, Grace saw the mask crack and something like pain flash across his face. But then the executive returned. "Grace, I appreciate your efforts. But your employment here is terminated." I'll have the agency send your final paycheck. Marcus, no. Rebecca started toward him, but he held up a hand. This is final. Someone from the agency will be here tomorrow to discuss new arrangements. He looked at Grace with something that might have been guilt. You can see yourself out. Grace looked at Rebecca, whose face had gone from fierce to devastated. She looked at Ethan, who was clinging to her like she was the only solid thing in his world. And she made a decision. Mr. Montgomery, Grace said quietly, I'll leave. But before I do, I need to say something. She paused, measuring her words carefully. I've worked in homes like this for 30 years. I've seen children with everything money can buy and nothing their hearts need. I've watched parents convince themselves that love is a weakness and structure is everything. And you know what I've learned. Marcus said nothing, but he didn't walk away. The children who thrive aren't the ones with the strictest schedules or the most expensive doctors. They're the ones who know, deep in their bones, that they matter to someone. That they're seen. That they're not a problem to be solved. Grace's voice remained gentle but firm. Your son isn't manipulating you, Mr. Montgomery. He's begging you to see him. And one day, if you don't start listening, he'll stop begging. He'll stop trying. And you'll look back and wonder where your son went. The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan had stopped crying, his face still pressed to Grace's shoulder. Rebecca stood frozen on the stairs. Marcus stared at Grace with an unreadable expression. Finally, he spoke. Tomorrow. You're done tomorrow. He walked to his office and closed the door. Have you ever had to choose between doing what's right and keeping your job? Have you ever had to stand up to someone in authority to protect someone vulnerable? What happened? Share your experience in the comments. Your voice matters, and others need to hear they're not alone in facing these impossible choices. That evening, Grace went home to her small apartment with a heavy heart. She sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at the tuition bill for Maya's next semester. The money from the Montgomery job was supposed to cover it. Now she was back to square one. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maya. How was work, Mama? Grace stared at the message, tears threatening. She couldn't tell her daughter that she'd just lost the best-paying job she'd ever had because she couldn't stay silent when a child needed help. Before she could respond, her phone rang. Rebecca. Grace, I'm so sorry. I tried to talk to Marcus, but he won't listen. He's already called the agency. Rebecca's voice was thick with tears. But I need you to know what you did for Ethan, for me. I'll never forget it. You showed me it's not too late. Mrs. Montgomery, it was my honor to help. You take care of that baby, you hear me? Keep doing what we started. He needs you. After they hung up, Grace sat in the dark, praying. She'd done the right thing. She knew that. But the right thing didn't pay Maya's tuition. Meanwhile, in the Montgomery mansion, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She stood in the hallway outside Ethan's nursery, listening to him cry. For 3 weeks, Grace had been there to help soothe him. Now she was gone, and Rebecca was terrified she'd fall back into old patterns. But then she remembered Grace's words. There's no wrong way to love your child. You just start. Rebecca opened the nursery door. Ethan was standing in his crib, tears streaming down his face, arms reaching out. Grace. Grace. Rebecca's heart shattered. Her son wasn't even calling for her. But instead of retreating, she walked to the crib and lifted him out. It's Mama, baby. Grace isn't here, but I am. I'm here. Ethan looked at her with confused, tear-filled eyes. Then he did something that made Rebecca's breath catch. He laid his head on her shoulder, just like he used to do with Grace. They stood there in the dark nursery, Rebecca swaying gently, Ethan's crying gradually subsiding. It wasn't perfect. Her back ached from his weight. She didn't know if she was doing it right. But she was doing it. She was showing up. Downstairs, Marcus sat in his office, staring at nothing. He'd heard Ethan crying. He'd heard Rebecca go to him. And for the first time in months, he'd heard the crying stop without food being involved. Grace's words echoed in his mind. Your son isn't manipulating you. He's begging you to see him. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened his photo gallery. Hundreds of pictures, but almost none of Ethan. Plenty of the mansion, his car, business dinners. But his son. Maybe 5 photos, all from the hospital when Ethan was born. When had he stopped looking at his own child? He stood and walked upstairs, drawn by something he couldn't name. Rebecca's door was open, and he could see her in the rocking chair with Ethan, both of them asleep. The nursery curtains were open. When had that happened? Moonlight streamed across them, and for the first time in years, Marcus really looked at his family. His wife, exhausted but peaceful, holding their son. His son, no longer crying, finally calm. And him, standing in the doorway like a stranger, like he didn't belong in this picture. Grace's words came back. You write checks. That's not the same as showing up. Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call. It was 2 a.m., but this couldn't wait. The next morning, Grace was preparing for another day of job hunting when her phone rang. An unknown number. Ms. Williams? This is Marcus Montgomery. Grace's stomach dropped. Was he calling to threaten legal action? To accuse her of overstepping? Mr. Montgomery, I need to apologize. His voice was different. Quieter, humbler. And I need to ask you something. Would you be willing to come back? Not as a housekeeper. As, I don't even know what to call it. A family consultant. Whatever you want. Name your price. Grace sat down slowly. Mr. Montgomery, I appreciate that, but I watched my wife comfort our son last night. Really watched. For the first time in months, maybe years. And I realized you were right about everything. He paused. I've been running from my own family because I didn't know how to fix what was broken. But you showed us it wasn't about fixing. It was about showing up. Mr. Montgomery, I can't take your money just to. This isn't charity. We need help. Real help. Not another nanny, not another doctor with theories. We need someone who understands what we forgot, that children need love more than they need solutions. His voice cracked slightly. Please. I'm asking you to give us another chance. Grace thought about Maya's tuition. She thought about Ethan's face. She thought about Rebecca finally holding her son. And she thought about the look she'd seen on Marcus's face yesterday. That flicker of pain before the mask came back. I'll come back, she said. But on one condition. Anything. This isn't just about Ethan. This is about all of you learning to be a family again. That means you show up, Mr. Montgomery. Not just physically. Emotionally. Can you do that? There was a long pause. I don't know. But I want to try. Then I'll be there tomorrow morning. When Grace arrived the next day, the house felt different. The curtains were open. Sunlight flooded through the rooms. And there, in the living room, was a sight she never expected to see. Marcus Montgomery, powerful CEO, sitting on the floor in his expensive suit, attempting to stack blocks with Ethan. He was terrible at it. Awkward, uncertain, clearly out of his depth. But he was there. And Ethan, after a moment of confusion, reached out and placed a block on top of Marcus's tower. Good job, buddy, Marcus said. His voice uncertain but genuine. Rebecca stood in the doorway, watching, tears streaming down her face. When she saw Grace, she mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Over the next 3 months, Grace watched a family slowly, painfully, beautifully put itself back together. Marcus started coming home at 5 instead of 8. He'd sit with Ethan before dinner, reading books, playing simple games. It was stiff at first, uncomfortable. But Ethan, with the resilience of children, met his father halfway. Rebecca started therapy, real therapy, not just pills. She learned she'd been suffering from severe postpartum depression, compounded by isolation and the pressure to be perfect. She learned that asking for help wasn't weakness. She learned that she didn't have to be perfect to be enough. And Ethan. The transformation was remarkable. With consistent love, with parents who showed up, with understanding that comfort didn't come from food, he began to slim down naturally. His constant crying stopped. His vocabulary exploded. At his 3-year checkup, the new pediatrician was amazed at his progress. But the real transformation wasn't physical. It was the light that came back into his eyes. The way he laughed now, freely and often. The way he'd run to both his parents with equal joy. The way he'd learned that he was loved not for being perfect, but simply for being. 6 months after that first day, Grace arrived to find a surprise. The family was in the kitchen together. Marcus making pancakes, badly. Rebecca helping Ethan set the table, laughter filling the space. Grace! Ethan ran to her, and she scooped him up. He was lighter now, healthier, but more than that, he was happy. "We wanted you to have breakfast with us," Rebecca said, smiling. "To celebrate." Celebrate what? Marcus turned from the stove, flour somehow in his hair. Ethan's preschool acceptance. And something else. He exchanged a look with Rebecca. "We've decided to fund a scholarship at Maya's university. In your name. For students from underprivileged backgrounds studying social work or child development." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to." "We know we don't have to," Rebecca interrupted gently. "We want to. You gave us our family back. You showed us that money can't buy what matters most, but it can help others find their way." She paused. "The scholarship is fully funded. Maya's entire education, plus 20 students each year going forward." Grace couldn't speak. She looked at this family, broken 6 months ago, now laughing over burnt pancakes, and she saw what love could do. Not perfect love. Not easy love. But real, showing up everyday love. "There's something else," Marcus added. "We've started a foundation. For families struggling with postpartum depression, with childhood obesity, with the isolation that comes from pretending everything is fine." He looked at his wife. "We're calling it the Grace Initiative. Because you taught us that grace, the kind that shows up, that sees people, that refuses to give up, that's what changes everything." Ethan tugged on Grace's sleeve. "Grace, come eat. Daddy burned the pancakes again." They all laughed, and Grace let herself be pulled to the table. As she sat down with this family that had become hers, as she watched Marcus try to scrape burnt batter off a pan while Rebecca and Ethan dissolved into giggles, she thought about how close they'd all come to losing this. One choice. One decision to break the rules and climb those stairs. One moment of choosing love over compliance. That's all it took to start saving a family. This story shows how one person's courage to act can transform an entire family. When have you witnessed or experienced the power of someone simply showing up and refusing to give up? What small act of courage changed someone's life? Share your story in the comments below. Let's inspire each other with real examples of how love wins. 2 years have passed since Grace first walked through those mansion doors. The changes are remarkable, not just for the Montgomerys, but for everyone their story touched. Ethan is now 4 years old, healthy and thriving in preschool. His teachers describe him as empathetic, creative, and quick to comfort other children who are upset. He's learned the most important lesson Grace taught him. That love isn't something you earn, it's something you are worthy of simply by existing. Rebecca has become an advocate for postpartum mental health. She speaks at conferences, sharing her story without shame, helping other mothers understand they're not alone. The Grace Initiative has helped over 300 families in 2 years, providing therapy, support groups, and education about childhood emotional health. Marcus still works hard, but he's learned the difference between providing and being present. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he leaves work at 4 to pick Ethan up from preschool. Every Sunday, the family has breakfast together. And Marcus has finally learned to make pancakes without burning them. And Grace. She continues working with the Montgomery family, but now as the director of the Grace Initiative. Her daughter Maya graduated with honors and now works alongside her mother, helping families find their way back to each other. The scholarship has helped 48 students pursue careers in social work and child development. But perhaps the most beautiful change is the simplest one. The curtains in the Montgomery mansion stay open now. Sunlight floods every room. The house is often messy, filled with Ethan's toys and art projects. It's not perfect anymore. It's better than perfect. It's a home. This story isn't just about one family or one heroic housekeeper. It's about a truth that our world desperately needs to remember. that the most profound transformations don't come from wealth, expertise, or perfect strategies. They come from the simple, radical act of seeing another person's pain and refusing to look away. Grace didn't have a PhD in child psychology. She didn't have a best-selling parenting book or a social media following. What she had was something far more powerful. She had empathy, courage, and the willingness to risk everything for a child she barely knew. In a world that tells us to mind our business, to stay in our lane, to follow the rules even when the rules are breaking people, Grace reminds us that sometimes the most important thing we can do is break the rules that protect comfort and choose the messy, complicated, beautiful work of loving people back to life. The Montgomerys were drowning in a mansion that looked perfect from the outside. Grace threw them a lifeline, not because it was her job, but because she understood something fundamental. We are all responsible for each other. When we see someone suffering, we don't need permission to care. We just need courage. Ethan's story could have ended so differently. A child lost to neglect, hidden behind wealth and closed doors. A mother consumed by shame and depression. A father running from his own family. But it didn't end that way, because one woman decided that a child's cry mattered more than keeping her job. Stories like this remind us that extraordinary change doesn't require extraordinary resources. It requires ordinary people willing to do extraordinary things when the moment calls for it. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think differently about the people suffering behind closed doors, please hit that like button. It helps these important stories reach others who need to hear them. Subscribe for more hidden truths that reveal what really matters in life. Hit the notification bell so you never miss stories that challenge us to see beyond appearances and act with courage. And most importantly, look around your own life. Who's crying behind closed doors? Who's drowning in plain sight? Be someone's grace. The world needs more people who refuse to stay silent when they hear someone crying. Until next time, keep your eyes open, your heart soft, and your courage strong. The people around you are counting on it, even if they can't say it out loud. If you want to see more stories about hidden truths, courage, and the transformative power of love, check out this next video where we uncover what happened when a CEO discovered his janitor's secret. What he did next shocked everyone. Click to watch now.